Loved ones, this is Management 3130, Principles of Management, and today this is session 21. If you look at the syllabus, you'll know precisely where we are. We'll be talking about chapter 12, which is a chapter that deals with different concepts, different approaches to motivating employees. And I would tell you experientially that to me is a very difficult thing to do. I'll tell you why later, but this is a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to motivating employees. I want to mention something that, if you went to the syllabus, you'd see that our next class meeting would have been midterm 3. So let me give you a status on midterm 3. I'm working on developing the test right now. I haven't finished. It's going to be some sort of a short essay test. I will probably write 4 questions and have you answer any 3 or something like that. But I want to point out that this is a short essay. I'm not looking for bullet points. I'm not looking for 1 or 2 sentences. Each time you respond to a question, write a short essay. And the standards are pretty straightforward. You need to demonstrate to me that you understand the concept, and you need to communicate it clearly. If you do that, you will hit the long ball. You'll perform uncommonly well. So I'll have midterm 3 up on Folio soon. Once you complete it, you need to submit it to Dropbox. There's a folder in Dropbox for your 3rd midterm. And again, that will happen soon. I haven't had a chance to finish it because, unsurprisingly, a lot of stuff is crashing in on us at the same time. Converting classes to this format, as well as all the related sorts of things, exams and that sort of stuff. So let me jump into chapter 12 because again, it's really rich in content. There's a lot of good stuff here, and some of it is complex. That is for sure and for certain. So I want to start. Gosh, I don't have the page number. In chapter 12, the early in the chapter, there's a definition of motivation. And the definition is psychological processes. That means there are different approaches we can take to this that arouse and direct goal-oriented behavior. So here's an observation that I would share with you. I don't think I'm being cynical when I say this. I think it's quite difficult for anyone to motivate someone else. I don't care what the circumstances are. Motivation, in my view, is largely internal. You have heart or you don't. You want to accomplish a goal or it doesn't matter to you. So I get it that we can reward people and we can punish them. That is inarguable. But those things are transactional and they're not really motivational. So again, that's just a perspective. You can challenge it, we could debate it. But motivation, I think, is quite difficult because, in my view, motivation is not something where you whip people until they comply. Motivation is internal. You want to accomplish a goal or you don't. And that's largely a function of the value that the goal has to you and effort and a variety of things like that. So I really believe that motivation is largely internal. Now, we talk about reward and punishment. It's fair to say they would be flip sides of the same coin, aren't they? If you're in a managerial role, and you will be soon, you have the power, you have the authority to reward people for doing good things and to punish them for doing bad things. Gee, imagine that. I'm pretty sure, I hope that your parents did that very same thing. But in this context of looking at rewards, it's fair to say that rewards come in 2 flavors. One flavor is extrinsic, and the other flavor is intrinsic. An extrinsic reward is something that has a definable value. For example, if you said to me, you've performed very well, I'm going to give you a raise, it's going to be 4% of your base salary. That's a definable value, isn't it? It's an economic value. If you said, you've performed uncommonly well, here's a $1,500 bonus, or stock, or a company car, or whatever the case may be. Many rewards in an organizational context are extrinsic because they have definable value. They have some sort of exchange that's valuable in other contexts. An intrinsic reward is something that we value internally. And I'll tell you about my decision years ago to move from public practice to academia. Truthfully, I didn't know what I'm about to share with you until I became part of the academic community. But one of the things that I treasure about academia is I have a great deal of autonomy. I don't get to pick the courses I teach, but I can express my preferences to my boss. But research is a very big part of my job, and I get to pick the projects that I want to work on, the people that I want to work with collaboratively. I'm not forced to do stuff that doesn't interest me. I'm not forced to work with people who I think are complete jerks. So, and that also means that in addition to this autonomy about research topics, I have a great deal of autonomy in terms of time. I could work at home, I can work in my office. Now my preference is office because I don't think I'm ADHD, but I get distracted at home. I want to go cut the grass or play with a dog or something like that. And besides that, I don't work at home well, not just for distraction, but because of something I will call duality. My office has all of the resources I need and want, whether it's for teaching or scholarship or anything else. I don't have any of that stuff at my home. So I would have to in some way either duplicate it in a home office or transport it back and forth. And I don't see a lot of benefit or value in that. I'm the sort of person who works 45 or 50 hours here in this building, and when I leave the office, I leave the office. I don't check email on the weekend. I don't usually take work home with me. So my point is, I have a lot of autonomy, a lot of freedom of choice. I can work at home or not. I can go to conferences or not. I can choose to serve on different committees or not, different service activities. So the fact that I have that relative freedom of decision making is enormously important to me. It really is. And it might be to you. I can't know that. But my point is that autonomy, that decision making flexibility that I have is a really significant intrinsic reward for me. It matters greatly. Again, intrinsic rewards come in a lot of different forms because I can't know what you value, can I? If you tell me that, I would. If you said, big boss, I'd like to be able to do this. If I could make it happen, I would. Because I want you to contribute, I want you to feel satisfied. There are just a number of dimensions that are beneficial to that. But the point that I wanted to just make simple but clear was that when we talk about rewarding people as a motivational tool, some rewards are extrinsic. Some people are incredibly motivated by money, and that's fine. That is fine. We all have to have that exchange medium. But other people are very, very much motivated by what you would call intrinsic rewards. Here's an example of an intrinsic reward. Let's assume you're in a managerial role, and one of your people comes to you and says, boss, I have an idea about a new product or service or some concept we should take to the market, but I don't really have an opportunity to work on it because I'm so darn busy. Here's an example of an intrinsic reward. You could say, important person to me, I'm now going to give you 15% of your compensated time as a release time. And I want you to work on that project. But in 4 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever is reasonable, report back to me. Tell me what you found. So that's pretty energizing because if you work a 40-hour week and you give somebody 15% of their compensated time as a release time, that means for 6 hours a week, they can focus on this new concept or project or whatever. But you have to establish milestones, don't you? So if you're the boss and you give this intrinsic reward to an employee, work on this project, report back to me in a month or 6 weeks, here's what you should expect. They'll come back and say, I've looked at it, the space is crowded, there's no opportunity, so this is a swing and a miss. And the two of you celebrate that and have a cup of coffee and you go on. But what if your rising star says, boss, this is really promising. I don't think there's any competing product or service or the people that do it poorly or whatever, but if you see an opportunity, you might say to the employee might say to you, gosh, this is really kind of promising. So if I were the boss, I would say, this is exciting. Here's what I want you to do. I'm going to give you release time, but it's now 20% of your compensated time. So that's a day a week. You wrap a team around this thing, study it more, and come back with recommendations. And we might agree that it would be in 8 weeks or whatever's reasonable. I don't know. But you see my point? You can reward people by putting them in situations where they can do things that energize them. And what if this turns out to be a home run? What if this employee has an idea that the market really values? Who wins there, loved ones? Everybody. The employee, customers, the company, everyone benefits. It's a truly good situation. But I just want you to understand that rewards come in two flavors, extrinsic and intrinsic. And for many people, I'm one of them, intrinsic rewards are really, really powerful motivators. Now, the next part of this chapter deals with these are largely different perspectives that psychologists have taken over the years to try to explain behavior and motivation. Maslow's hierarchy, the work of Hertzberg. Most of these things are intuitive. They seem to make sense, but there's absolutely no empirical support. When people study them, when they gather data and study the results, what they expected doesn't happen. It's a flawed theory. That's exactly what it turns out to be. If I propose anything where I think there's a formal argument, a relationship among variables, and I test it, I gather data, and the data don't support my theory, it's possible that my data collection and analytics were flawed, but it's also possible that the theory is bogus. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about Maslow's hierarchy or Hertzberg's work or some of these other psychological approaches to motivation, because in decades of empirical study, we can't find a lot of support for them. They don't seem to have very good predictive value. There is one, though, that I think is worth talking about. It's the work of David McClellan. It's discussed at length early in this chapter. And I'll put it on the board, but I want to give you a quick backstory. McClellan is a psychologist. I don't remember where he was trained, but he had a long-term faculty appointment at Harvard, and he did some good work. I have probably his seminal book, which is a work on power. And McClellan was a psychologist who was studying motivation, and one of his studies, he came to something which is useful. I want to put it on the whiteboard. Again, this is David McClellan's work, and once I get his work up here, this framework, I'll explain it to you. McClellan's work dates back to the early 70s, and he was still very intellectually active through probably, maybe the early 2000s. But again, a long and distinguished career. Some of his work that's really fairly powerful when it comes to motivation, he was trying to discern what motivates people. And he came up with three things that he thought explained it. He said some people have a need, that's what this small n means. Need for achievement, that's what ACH means here. Some people have a need for achievement. Some people have a need for affiliation, close interactions with others. Some people have a need for power, the ability to influence outcomes. So McClellan is studying what these sources of motivation, and he really believed, he created this conceptual framework. He said, I think these three things explain what motivates people. So what I did, or what I want to do with you today, is I want to score myself on this. And I'd like you to do that too, because it might give you some insights on what motivates you. Now, what I'm about to do is Bill Norton's assessment of Bill Norton, which means that it's not objective. However, I'm dealing with perfect information, because no one knows me as well as I do except Max. Max is my dog. Max is a 6-year-old Italian Mastiff, and he's a sweet puppy. So, need for achievement. I would say to you that my need for achievement, this is me rating me, I would say that it's relatively high. And I say that because I can think back to high school years when I pushed through, when I persevered, and when I achieved goals that were noteworthy. That describes me in the military. That described me in business. I was in industry for 17 years. and I've been in academia for 26 or 28 years now, and I've got a good body of work, some meaningful accomplishments. So across my entire adult life, I would say to you that my need for achievement is relatively high. I'm not a slacker. I don't shoot for the low-hanging fruit, or whatever that expression is. So, need for achievement, Bill Norton says Bill Norton is high in terms of what motivates me. Now, need for affiliation. I would say that that's low or moderate. There are people in my life that matter to me greatly, but there aren't a lot of them. You know that I don't have a presence on social media because I think it's actually anti-social media. The very design of every social media platform means that there's no direct human interaction. And I don't live in that world. I live in a world where relationships are important. But I don't need tens of thousands of people to like me. So my need for affiliation is low or moderate. It's not high. There are some people for whom it's high. And you know who they are. They're fairly needy. My need for power is pretty close to zero. I don't have any particular wish to push your life in one direction or another. So I get it that I'm assessing me, and you could argue that that's flawed because it could not be objective because the subject is assessing himself, and I get that. But the virtue of that too is no one knows me as well as I do, and Max, of course. So McClellan's work, again, he did plenty of stuff beyond this, but he said the things that I think motivate people are their need for achievement, or their need for affiliation, or their need for power. And I just want you to reflect on this framework the way I have. How would you rate you? I think that might be informative for you to do that. Equity theory. I need some more board space. When we talk about equity in any form, we're essentially discussing our assessment of something that's fair and just. If I treat you fairly, that is an equitable situation. If I treat you unfairly, I'm creating a situation where there's a lack of equity. And not many of us would want to be there. So, there's a theory well established called equity theory, and it, to a large degree, it does predict people's motivation. So let me put it on the board, and I think you'll see why. So let me tell you what I have here. I have a simple equation. On one side, we have this relationship between inputs and rewards, and that describes you. How hard do you work? What do you get in exchange for that? And we hope that that is always equal. We hope that that is equitable, because what you do is you compare yourself to others, and you look at their inputs and their rewards, and you think, is that reasonably fair? Is that equal? Think about this in a work context. You have a boss that plays favorites, and your boss doesn't like you as much as she or he likes someone else. So you put in the same inputs as your coworker, but she or he gets much greater reward. Well, that's not equitable, is it? It's not fair. And the point is that equity theory says that we compare ourselves with others. We look at this relationship between what we put into something and what we get out of it. And if they're reasonably equal, we have a sense that we're in an equitable situation, that we're being treated fairly. But if these are not equal, then clearly we're in a situation where there's a lack of equity, and that demotivates us, doesn't it? So, again, it's useful in many, many ways. There's another theoretical framework that I want to talk about. This is equity theory. This other framework I'm not going to put on the board because you can pull this out of the text, because what I'm trying to do right now is give it some emphasis. This is a theoretical framework called justice theory, and this is powerful in terms of its motivational force. But what I want you to understand is I don't care who you are, I don't care what your role is, what company you work for, you individually have an enormous amount of influence and significance over creating a work environment that's equitable simply by you observing this thing called justice theory. There are three pieces to justice theory: distributive justice, procedural justice, and interactional justice. I really want to talk primarily about procedural justice. Clearly, these other directions are discussed in the text. But let me tell you about procedural justice. It simply asks one question: is the process fair and equitable? Whatever the process is, it could be promotions, it could be budget allocations, it could be work assignments. Is the process fair and equitable? Am I treated similarly to other people? I want to give you an example, and it's a goofy one, but I can demonstrate this, I think, pretty quickly and pretty effectively. Let's assume that all of us are law enforcement officers, and we're a member of the same department. So we're all brothers and sisters in blue. And one of you is involved in an officer-involved shooting. You show up at a crime scene, there's an active shooter, and you shoot the bad guy or bad girl or whatever's going on there. So you're a cop. So now in our department, here's what could happen. What if we have a heavily politicized police department where people don't care about the community, they don't care about the actual cops, they just care about their own brand? I think I just described the city of Baltimore. I really do. They've been through 3 mayors in 6 months and more police commissioners than that, and it's really sad and deeply dysfunctional. But my point is, in my goofy example, you're a cop, you're one of my brothers and sisters, and you shoot a bad guy. And because we're in this heavily politicized department, you are literally put on administrative leave with no compensation. And then either the police commissioner or the mayor makes a statement to the press that says, that officer over there has been suspended without pay, and we're going to do an investigation, and we'll see how this turns out. So the investigation starts, but it stumbles and launches, and it goes forward in fits and spurts. And 10 months later, there's a finding. Now, you've been suspended without pay for 10 months, and your big bosses went to the press and said, this person's a jerk, suspended without pay, and then the investigation lasted most of a year. Your brothers and sisters are going to look at that and think, holy crap, if I show up at a crime scene, I'm not going to shoot anybody, because now I know how I will be treated. So let's go to a new department. Let's go to a department where there is a sense of procedural justice. The way we enact things, the processes, the procedures that we do are fair and equitable. Same shooting, same actors. You shoot a bad guy. The chief the chief, the mayor, and you have a joint press conference. You just stand there quietly and respectfully, and they say that Officer Norton was involved in a shooting. We are reassigning Officer Norton to non-patrol duties while we conduct an investigation. There is no sanction or discipline or punishment. We just need to take a hard look at it internally. So your department conducts a thorough investigation. It's objective, and it's done in 10 days or 2 weeks. It almost doesn't matter what the finding is. Everybody else in the department is going to look at this and say, Norton was treated fairly. He wasn't sanctioned, punished. He wasn't held up as being a bad actor, as stepping away from his training. He wasn't suspended without pay. He was just reassigned to desk duties for 2 weeks. And then there was a finding. So this thing about procedural justice is the process, is the procedure fair and equitable? You, loved ones, can make it that. You have control over what happens in your unit. You can be scrupulously fair and equitable, and you should be. And that's what I want you to understand. I don't care what your rank is in an organization. You could be early career, you could be someplace 6 months. If you have some work-related authority over other people, you can create an environment where everyone is treated fairly and equitably. And not only will you be respected, but look at the culture that you create. People know if something happens, they're not going to be singled out as being bad actors. They know that they'll be treated fairly, that the process will deal with them equitably. So this notion of justice theory is a big deal because you can do this immediately for the rest of your lives, no matter where you are. You can just ensure that the process is fair. We don't know in advance what the outcomes will be, but you can make sure that the process is fair. And the point is, if it's fair, people think, great, there's a sense of equity here, I'm in a good place. But tip that. What if they perceive it as being unfair? It's demotivating in huge ways, in troubling ways. So, justice theory, it's big stuff because you can put it to work immediately as soon as you leave here. I want to talk now briefly about the implications of voice. Voice is a concept that largely comes out of the literature of organizational behavior. And voice simply says that all of us in an organization should have some input. We should be able to express our perspectives on something. I'm actually a huge fan of voice because I accidentally discovered how important it was to engage in what I will call collaborative decision making when I was in Vietnam. My habit was when I got an order from battalion, from our S3 operations people, I wouldn't write anything, but I would draft a quick field order. And I would get my guys in a campfire kind of scenario, and I'd say, okay, here's our task, here are the resources, here's the enemy activity, terrain, logistics for movement, timelines, that sort of thing. And then I would tell them my plan. I would say, here's what I intend to do, but I want to hear from you before we launch. Because I'm talking to seasoned, experienced, competent warriors. I want to hear their perspective. Now, there were many times when everybody would just say, we're good with that, 6. But there were others where somebody would say, I think that's a bad decision, and here's why. So my point is, when people have voice, sometimes what they say shapes the outcomes, but even if it doesn't, even if you don't adopt everything everyone says, there's motivation there because people think, gosh, I'm respected. My boss, my team lead actually wants to hear from me. I may have an opportunity to shape what we're doing. I'm not being treated like a mushroom. I'm kept in the dark and fed poopy. So this thing about voice is a very big deal. All it means is that people have input. But I accidentally learned a half a century ago how valuable collaborative decision making is. To engage other people and say, what's your perspective? I also will promise you something on this discussion of voice. The first thing that's true is we're talking about motivation, and it is truly motivational for people to say, you know, I respect your position, I want to hear from you. But the other thing that's true, and this is probably an unintended benefit, is the decision quality is almost always better. Any decision that you and I make together will be significantly better than any decision I make alone. Because you have skills, experiences, competencies. And if I build on them, our collaborative decision is going to be much better than anything I would have done independently. So voice is motivational in the sense that people know that you hold them up, that you value their perspective. But it's also, it has this delightful other benefit, and that is that it improves decision quality. Gosh, I don't know. I don't have the page number in my notes, and I apologize. There's a discussion in this chapter on what is called the job characteristics model, and there are essentially 5 things that make up this job characteristics model. And the reason that this is significant motivationally is you can sometimes alter these attributes, and that's a big deal. So here are the 5 characteristics. What is the variety of skills? What about the actual task identity? What is it that we're doing? Is it clear at all what we're doing? Is the task significant? Do I have any autonomy, any decision-making authority? And am I going to get any feedback? If I do something, Are you gonna say, gosh, that was well done, or Bill, you screwed up there, and here's why, and let's try to go in another direction the next time? Feedback is informative always, unless you live in a closed system, and I don't think any of us do. So think about this, if you are in a managerial role, and you have this opportunity to motivate people, could you put them in a job where they have a variety of skills that are developed or needed to carry out a particular job? That makes them more valuable, they make a greater contribution. So can you vary the tasks? Can you change the specifics, the identity of the task? It's hard for me to know in advance because we're talking in the abstract. Can you give them, your employees, more autonomy, more decision-making authority? I will tell you something that's well understood in the leadership literature, and I mean this goes back centuries that I know of. I've studied leadership and taught it for probably 25 years, and I've only been doing research in it for maybe the last 15. But leadership is profoundly important to me as a domain, as an academic discipline, and even as a practitioner. The leadership literature says something that's just a blunt instrument. It says, here's what great leaders do. Great leaders tell their people what needs to be done, and then they let their team members decide how best to do it. So senior leaders say, here's the task, here's what we must accomplish. I value you, your competency, your insights, your skills. You decide how best to do it. Now, wouldn't that be the opposite, the categorical opposite of micromanagement, where somebody hovers over you and tells you every single step? I promise you that's rewarding and that's developmental, but it's motivational. If I'm your big boss and I say, look, I have faith in you. I have faith in your judgment, your skills, you're there, boots on the ground, you know what's happening in real time, and I don't because I'm over here somewhere. So here's what you have to do. Here's the goal that must be accomplished. You decide how best to do it. So that's just a significant tenet of great leadership. Great leaders tell their people, their team members, what needs to be done, and they give them the autonomy, the decision-making authority to decide how best to do it. And boy, that's big stuff in terms of motivation. And then the last thing that they talk about in this chapter that I want to discuss with you is something called reinforcement theory. And again, I don't have page notes from the text, and I apologize for that. But this is the last topic in chapter 12 that I want to talk to you about. A reinforcement theory, I can show that to you in the Old Testament, and parts of the Old Testament are 4,500 years old, and they still seem to have value to us today in terms of guidance. So reinforcement theory says, if somebody engages in good behavior, you reward it. If somebody engages in bad behavior, you punish it. Isn't that how parents typically raise their children? Doesn't that describe us in almost every dimension of our lives? You do something good, you get rewarded. You do something bad, you get punished. Now, I get it that sometimes good things go unnoticed, and sometimes they go unrewarded, and sometimes bad behavior goes unpunished. But reinforcement theory says, based on your decisions, you reinforce good behavior, or you reinforce bad behavior, or you crush bad behavior. So again, it's just utterly straightforward, and my only point is that they talk about it, and I get it, it's significant because most of us have experienced that from the earliest stages of our lives. But reinforcement theory, you reward the good and you punish the bad. Gee, imagine that. So, I love you, I'm done. Go do important things. I am trying, across all of my classes, I'm trying to get at least 3 videos posted a day. And right now that's a lot of heavy lifting because I'm digging out from a hole. I have everything I've done all of my career has been face to face. So I'm not complaining, I'm just saying that I'm working diligently. In fact, I probably will work both days over the weekend. Once I get some critical mass, once I get ahead of the curve, I may revert to kind of a normal schedule. But right now I'm putting up probably 3 videos a day across all of my classes. So I urge you to toggle in and get at least 2 or 3 sessions a week and do whatever's required of you. Because right now, we have every reason to believe that the end of the May semester will be as it was originally scheduled. So we've not had any kind of relief or extension or anything like that. So please stay on track, stay on task. And as I promised you early in this presentation, I will get your third midterm up on folio soon. So love you. I will talk to you soon. Have a wonderful day.